Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. It's a real privilege to have the guest from podcast episode number 2, Dr. Michael Beck, back with us today. Hey, Michael, how are you today?
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me, sir.
And Michael's an ordained elder with the United Methodist Church. He's currently serving 2 congregations and continuing to revitalize them, Wildwood United Methodist Church and St. Mark's United Methodist Church in Florida. Also, he is the director of remissioning for Fresh Expressions in the United States and the cultivator of Fresh Expressions for the Florida Annual Conference. And on top of that, he's the director of the House of Studies for Fresh Expressions at United Theological Seminary in Ohio, where he teaches in the DMin program, offers some tracks in the MDiv program, and also some non-degree types of things. So, Michael, you're really busy, but all these things center on your commitment to the mission of God. So, again, welcome back. And how has COVID-19 affected your work? It's been 6 months now, almost, since since the U.S. has essentially kind of shut down and practiced social distancing, but it hasn't slowed your missional work down. So, what are some takeaways? What have you learned from the pivots that you've had to make as a church leader, as even in your work with Fresh Expressions?
Yeah, so, in the recovery community, we talk about the gift of desperation and how desperation is kind of the seedbed of innovation. And I don't want to in any way minimize the reality of the pandemic. It is hard. It is devastating. We have 2 adult children who work COVID unit in our local hospital in Ocala. So they're essentially traumatized by what for them is kind of like a world war or something, really their generation's version of that. So I understand all that and the magnitude of it all. And I've had friends die from COVID, and obviously people in our church who've had it and been infected with it, and some have recovered. So saying all that on one side of things, and I think COVID-19 has been one of the greatest gifts to the church that we've received in probably many generations, because it's opened us to really kind of explore this new missional frontier where we find ourselves, which includes, a digital culture and people that spend 10, 11 hours a day on screens. And it's forced us to really kind of rethink some of our, think deeply about some of our theology and our missiology. And for us, because we had kind of a team-based idea, and we had kind of a third place concept of, Christian community can happen in any third place. It's kind of a fundamental belief for us. And third place is a concept that came from sociologist Ray Oldenburg. Just that, think Starbucks, neutral territory where people can gather. So we've been kind of planting these little Christian communities all over in the third places in our kind of our communal ecosystem. So we've had to rethink digital space as its own third place. How do you form Christian community there? How do you engage people who've never heard the gospel before there? How do you connect people in the life of discipleship and spirituality in those spaces? So we've been able to kind of move into that, and so I can do a lot from a screen, and all of our worship has been online since March. And we've actually grown because we've been able to expand into the network across the country. So we've had to redefine membership for our congregation, because we have people that have joined our church in Georgia and Pennsylvania and kind of spread all over. So what do we call those people? Are they members who are never going to probably step foot in our physical space? So we just call them network partners, and they do vows, and they come in on the screen, and they join into the life of our church with prayers, presence, gift, service, witness, but in their locality where they are.
Wow, there's a lot there, and we almost going to have to do another podcast. I think this ties in, though. I should have said in the introduction, you and Leonard Sweet have a new book. I was able to get through chunks of it over the weekend and skim through the whole piece. Thanks for letting me have a look at the kind of advanced copy of that. Contextual Intelligence. And I love the subtitle, Unlocking the Ancient Secret to Mission on the Front Lines. And in a sense, you've basically field tested all the stuff, well, for your whole career, but now COVID, you've been able to really show a new way of flexing contextual intelligence. That seems like that's what's guided you. Now, that title, that comes out of your actual dissertation that you worked on with Leonard Sweet. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we talked briefly about this back on episode 2, but I want to do a real deep dive on this, because again, we all heard your church actually has grown. You've created new problems for yourself because now you have these digital members, and I can hear people thinking, well, geez, they're not really connected because you're not incarnating the physical presence and all these kind of things. But missional activity creates problems, right? And then we have to think theologically about the solution to those problems. And I have a sense that that's really what contextual intelligence is all about, right? It's about reading the signs. How do you talk about, how would you define contextual intelligence?
So let me start to establish kind of the biblical foundation, and then we'll look at some different fields of research around the phenomenon. But so if you look in the Old Testament, in the book of Chronicles, Second Chronicles, there's the tribes are coming. First Chronicles, 12. The tribes are coming to bring allegiance to David. So there's a liminality. There's a transition period. We're moving from Saul's kingship to David, and so the tribes are coming to David. Some are bringing military power. Some are bringing items, stuff, resources. The Issacharians show up kind of empty-handed, really, and all it says about them is that they could read the signs of the times and knew what to do. So they bring a specific kind of intelligence where they could bring a hermeneutic of studying scripture. So there's a lot of rabbinic scholarship around the Issacharians, really being those that kind of dwelled in the tents and studied the Torah and kind of lived in the Torah and interpreted that. And they brought a semiotic, so the ability to read the context, read the signs, read the language and meaning systems around you, and then make decisions on what to do. So they were the ones that were brought in to kind of read the context, what's going on, and help make decisions. So what that looks like in the there's been a lot of this in the business world. One great resource out there is called In Their Time, some Harvard guys, Mayo and Nahira, and they did this massive study on all the greatest business leaders over the last 100 years. And they kind of examined everybody from like Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Madam C.J. Walker, who created a hair product industry in the midst of, oppression and everything. So they pulled out kind of what each of those leaders did that was distinct from everyone else, even in times of like Great Depression and times of liminality and change. They described the phenomenon of contextual intelligence. So that's macro and micro sensitivity to the shifting times. And they were able to turn what most people saw as challenges into opportunities. And so they call that contextual intelligence. Then a lot of scholars kind of came behind that. Really, in the field of psychology, there's a whole other kind of trail we could go down there, with Robert Sternberg, who proposed, intelligence doesn't happen in a vacuum. IQ is important, analytic, the ability to think and take something apart, solve a problem. But IQ has to be applied in a real context for people to have kind of success. So in the 80s, he started writing about contextual intelligence. And then obviously in the entrepreneurial world, people like Taryn Khanna started talking about how do you take information you learn in one context in a globalized network society and kind of unlearn maybe some of the contextual assumptions so they can be applied in a new context. So no one had really done, Matthew Cutts did some great work on contextual intelligence. He's got a lot of research out there on it. But no one had really applied it to the church world and kind of did a theology around contextual intelligence, applied it ecclesiologically to the church. So that's what this book is about, doing that in a practical way.
Yeah, and what I find really helpful, I've loved the missional work, and I'm probably going to overspeak what I'm going to say, but like Alan Hirsch, Shaping the Things to Come was a cutting edge book, and it gave frameworks too. So we're not going to, and what I'm about to say may sound like I'm taking a shot at some of the earlier folks, but one of the things I really like about your book, and it reminds me of Shaping of Things to Come a little bit. So I mean, this is a big compliment because it gives frameworks. Like, you're known for the guy that starts, Bible studies in tattoo parlors, Bibles and burritos. Fresh Expressions does all kinds of interesting ways to get the gospel out of the four walls of the church and creating little micro communities. And so so a lot of mistakes that leaders make, and this is, we think of these things as plug and play, right? And so, Michael Beck did this, so-and-so did that. All I have to do to have a church like those guys is to do the same thing. And so I walk into a tattoo parlor and start a Bible study, but nobody even wants to talk to me, or for whatever reason, right? Now your book, now again, maybe that that would work in some ways, but what your book actually does is it steps back, and at least for the self-aware leader, like when I read that book, I thought, okay, these are mindsets that if I learn how to essentially unlearn and critique myself, I can ferret out the unchanging things with the things that actually need to shift. And you and Lynn Sweet have basically given us a gift, because instead of just giving us the recipe, you've got behind the scenes, and we actually see the thinking that goes into a particular expression. So I want to, and that's, to me, that's what contextual intelligence seems like it really is. And you've given us a process. So if I read your book, I can actually be contextually more intelligent, not simply have, I need to go and start a dog walking ministry. And again, not making fun of anything, but what if I live in a community where there's no dogs, right? Or
Exactly.
Or like, if there's no tattoo parlor where I live, do I need to drive 25 miles to the nearest town and find, a place where there's a tattoo parlor? No, but I can have contextual intelligence, and I can find the equivalent of those little micro communities right where I live. So that's why I'm really excited about your book, 'cause it's a gift. It builds off of, it's kind of like inductive Bible study. You've gotten all these little pieces that you've done, and now you and Lynn Sweet have critically reflected, looked back, macro level. Here's a way to think about this, that now somebody in a different context can take these principles and learn how to reach people for Jesus where they are, which I think that's what your heart ultimately is anyway.
Right. Because we're kind of wired in the Western church to start with the strategy, or to take what we've learned and like apply it. And what we're actually saying is, no, it takes deep, prayerful study of your context, and whatever strategy should emerge out of that. And so that really is a different thinking process. And part of my research, my case study, was the Florida Conference, the North Central District. And we were noticing these pioneer leaders, the people who are doing these fresh expression stuff, that they were really thinking a different way. We use the language from Peter Senge of mental models. So the inherited mental model was operating a lot like what you were saying, where you go in and you kind of have, a McDonaldized version of what a Methodist church looks like, right?
Yeah.
So you can just plant it on any corner, and you can sell your spiritual Big Macs, and people are just going to come, right? But people aren't coming, and people don't want a McDonaldized, Methodist church on every corner. What they want is to know that they're loved and cared for by God, that their context is understood, that we've done the work of understanding the indigenous semiotics, language, signs, what stories are meaningful to these people, what practices are meaningful, which is what all the best missionaries have always done, right? If you look back over Vincent Donovan, and Donald McGavran, and if you kind of go down the list, they learned to let the context lead how they could communicate the gospel, and how church could kind of form and wild ways, as you plant the seeds of it and let it grow in an incarnational way. So that thinking process requires a little bit of unlearning, like you said. So I spent a lot of time with Philippians 2, which is that great hymn, maybe one of the oldest pieces of the New Testament there, yes. A poem, if you will, in Paul's letter. And in the mind of Christ, there's kind of these moves. So there's he who being the very form of God did not grasp equality with God, but emptied himself, right? Taking on the form of a doulos, slave, being born in human likeness, cross, and then resurrection, ascension, and then new community. Every knee bows before the Lord. So there's a sequence of moves in that starts with like an emptying. So, and rather than thinking I understand my community, and a lot of churches have been in the same context for a really long time, which doesn't do us any favors, because contexts are like clouds, not clocks.
It's good.
Yeah. So as soon as you think you have an accurate picture of what the context looked like, it changes and it shifts. So we may think we have a relationship with our community that's not actually authentic anymore. So that unlearning piece is about, kind of letting go of some of those assumptions that we have. And then that's kenosis, if you will. And then immersion is getting out in the community rather than sitting in a boardroom with a whiteboard trying to figure it out. We're going to go out and use our five senses. We're going to listen and smell and taste our community. We're going to eavesdrop, which I know that sounds sketchy, but it's a contextual intelligence skill. What are the stories people are telling? How are they communicating? What is good news to this people? What is the need here? So we just tried to create like a simple little framework where any church could think, I can, and Lynn is all against like formulas and, put these ingredients, add water and stir and you get something. But it is really kind of a framework to think about how to look at your community again.
Yeah, it's really good. And the thing I also like about the book, just the way it's written, is again, I can't tell who's writing what, which I like that. So you basically enmeshed your writing styles, you and Leonard Sweet, but you've also both kind of modeled at least one way of doing the mission, because the language, the book is really just has wonderful metaphors and flares and flavors. Like you use the word tincture, so you have all these kind of experimental things like you're mixing stuff up, and it makes the book come off really well. And as you said, you have this wonderful model of the Christ hymn, and you have it laid out in multiple steps there. Now, when someone's listening to us talk, and I can imagine someone saying, okay, this sounds really good, but I'm worried, aren't we going to lose something core to the gospel? Like, if we're going to make, McDonald's, one of the reasons McDonald's is successful is people like Big Macs. So, right. so how do we make sure that we plant an expression that doesn't lose something vital? And how do you know the difference between the unchanging things and things that are malleable or changeable?
Such a good question. So I think the short answer is we follow Jesus. And for us, Jesus is the hermeneutic. He's the model, and his incarnation. So it is basically the framework that we lay out. We talk about Jesus, God redeems universally through the particular. So Jesus comes into a very particular context, incarnate, Jesus of Nazareth, a little hole in the wall town, and into a specific culture, people, play, all of that contextuality, right? But through that specific particular, he redeems the cosmos through that human life, through that one cross that he dies on a hill on Golgotha. So there's this idea there that the particularity, contextuality redeems cosmically. And that for us is kind of the essence. The church has always, in every age and space, to really become vital and vibrant and spread, has to take on the context. It has to find, in the Catholic term, enculturation. And if it doesn't, you get kind of where we are in a post-Christendom scenario where we're holding on to a particular time-bound version of the church, that very Euro-tribal kind of, where society has shifted and changed around the church, and we've not found a valid enculturation in this new place. So I think if you stay with Jesus and his life and his death and his resurrection and his teaching, reading the whole narrative of Scripture through that, right? So he fulfills the old and new. He is the embodiment of Torah. So it's not like we're discarding some piece, but seeing him as the synthesis and fulfillment of it all. So the teaching that he lays out, his kingdom ethic, all of that's included in that. And I think what we see with people just boots on the ground is there is a new Protestant, protest against spiritual but not religious movement. And you and I might say, well, spirituality and religion are, very intricately connected. But for the most part, what people are saying is institutional church, no; Jesus, yes. So for instance, when we're sitting in a fresh expression of church and people have no framework, no theology to operate from. So we're not going to do an in-depth study of, Leviticus or something. What we'll start with is the Jesus story, and we'll ask some simple questions. So here's a story about Jesus. If this story happened today, what would it look like? So then people can talk about that. They can bring their contextual language to it. Well, I think it would look like this. Jesus would do this. He meets this woman at a well. She's social distancing, like untouchable, COVID-19 or whatever. You could kind of read into it. So I think Jesus would do this. There's no right or wrong answers. You don't have to be a scholar or theologian. You're just focusing on Jesus and thinking about what he would. Then you say, well, if this story is true about Jesus, how would it make a difference in my life? And so you've got the core, the husk of the gospel, that people are engaging the person of Christ, and they're thinking about him and how he relates and how he talked and how he loved. And so it's like Jesus' parable about the old and the new wineskin. You got to have different delivery mechanisms. The gospel's the same. And for us, that's a person, And the gospel has to be simple enough that anybody can describe it. Because I think sometimes I do this in seminary classrooms, like, what is the gospel? And you get like a 3-page, 20-paragraph answer. Like, that's not accessible to most people. But if I can say, to me, the gospel is really a person. The good news is a person named Jesus of Nazareth, who put on flesh and showed us what it means to be human, and gives us an image of God that we can access and know. Most people can kind of grasp that and go, okay, I can get that. So that would be how I would say that there's so many things that are time bound. That what we inherit as the church, really, there's so much of it that's context, of a past context. And if we can simplify, get down to Jesus and the essential creeds of the church, like we often go to the Nicene Creed for a definition of the church. The church is one, holy, Catholic, apostolic, was and always should be. So do we have a unity there? Do we have a Catholicity connection across the whole church? Is there a holy worship of God that's transforming our life and amending our behaviors and based on that? And then are we going out in mission to our others? So, yeah.
No, that was good. You just you covered a lot of pieces. I could imagine a listener like, well, geez, if it's just about Jesus, how do we avoid making Jesus in our own image? And then, just now we've listened to you talk about Scripture. So it is about Jesus, but it's through Scripture. And then you mentioned the Nicene Creed. So now you're back into the tradition of the entire church. So how though? Again, this is true of more conservative versions that do things in traditional ways, the McDonald's version of church. How do we avoid syncretism? Because that seems like that's always the danger, whether it's institutional church that becomes too associated with one political party or the other. Again, we're in election season. I'm not asking for political comments, or I'm doing a fresh expression with persons that don't have a lot of background, and they read their spirituality into a version of Jesus that doesn't line up with scripture, doesn't line up with the creeds. Again, this happens on the left, the right, traditional, fresh expression. So how does contextual intelligence help us to avoid syncretism so that the gospel, the good news that we actually share, really is the good news and not just another form of oppression or ideology that we just don't need?
So good. It's a big question, and
That was a big question, Michael. So save us from ourselves, please.
That's a grenade question right there. Honestly, I think the form of church that most of us have inherited is actually syncretism. It's a syncretism of, industrial revolution society. It's a syncretism of, American imperial values. I love Walter Brueggemann talks about, the marks of empire: extraction, commoditization, and then violence to enforce that. So we've got this version of Christianity that's about extraction, commoditization, and then violence to enforce. So I'm being a little bit critical, but that we already have experienced syncretism. So what we know as church and gospel is already, as you said, if you're a Democrat, then Jesus is a Democrat. If you're a Republican, Jesus is a Republican. Jesus is an America First guy, which is, antithesis of what Jesus actually did and taught and lived. So I think the unlearning piece is kind of being able to strip some of that away and maybe just see Jesus in his own context, on his own terms, and understanding him in his own right. And it's contextual intelligence is about understanding deeply the context and then being able to apply that to where you are. So searching Jesus, understanding him as a Jewish, non-white person and his culture and all of his challenges in his life, and then being able to apply that to our field today. I think probably the greatest way, it's just this andness that I believe in the uniqueness of Jesus Christ for salvation. I believe he's the way, the truth, and the life, and all of that. And on the other side of that, I also see that people have experienced the Holy Spirit, and there's value in all religious traditions, and there's some maybe piece of the truth of the divine that points to something beyond our human selves. So, and that just has to live in tension. But if we can't, speak in people's language in a way that they can access it. And I like to look back to Paul in, I believe it's Acts 15, I want to say maybe 17, in Athens. 17. Yeah. Okay. So he's communicating, and he's quoting their poets, their top Billboard 100. He's speaking in the language of their philosophers, and he's communicating in their contextual language the gospel. But then he gets to a point, right? And he's like, I see your poets say this, and there's the unnamed temple to God and all that. But then just unabashedly he proclaims, well, the unknown God is this God in Jesus Christ that we're talking about here today. So I think that's just a skill that you have to be able to navigate and say, yeah, I can see truth in that, and that's valid, and here's how Christ is present in that. And it's trying to help people see how the Holy Spirit is already moving and evident in every sphere of life, and how there are good life-affirming things happening in all over the place.
Yeah, it's powerful, and you and Lynn in the book, you have a really a large section of the book. You walk through what you call FY essays. You're playing off the FYI stuff, and an FY essay is for your situational awareness. And so, if we're going to learn or really unlearn our past ways to be open to what God's doing now, you talk about contextual intelligence in terms of these ways of growing in essentially situational awareness. Can you talk a little bit about that? And again, we don't have time to go over every one you have listed in the book, but just to give a little flavor for that, what are two or three of what you think, if you were just going to lead with a couple of those FYSAs, what would they be, and why do you think those are vital for us as pastors, as lay people, as persons that want to advance the gospel in our day, that why we need to embrace these?
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. The FISAs, so the intelligence community applies that acronym, for your situational awareness. So when you're on the battleground, probably not a good image military, but you have to understand your situation so that you can make accurate, decisions about what's going on in the heat of the battle, if you will. So we tried to give those little FISAs to apply, like a simple, practical little tool that any church person can do. I think the most important one I would start with is context walking. And one of the cool things that's happened with COVID is these two dual kind of things where it's like we're more digital than ever, but because we've been in quarantine and social distance and kind of lockdown, many of us, depending on what state you're in, we've also had to recover this posture of placefulness. So our place, because we're hunkered down in our place, we have to actually notice it again. Because I'm not flying around from meeting to meeting or going wherever. So I'm noticing the flowers in my place and what kind they are. And I'm noticing the species that inhabit this place and the people that are my neighbors that maybe I didn't see before that now I'm waving to. So there is nothing there's nothing against, all those tools where you can pull data about your context and learn. That's awesome. But there's no substitute for just getting in your context, walking around, inhabiting a space. And I think one of the things that happens for us clergy and inherited systems, there's this expectation, you're going to be in the office 5 days a week, and you're going to preach, amazing sermons on Sunday, and angels are going to come out of the heaven. And then you're going to do 300 home visits, and then every person who's sick in the hospital or has a toe surgery. So you can be so consumed with all that needs to be done in the inherited church that you basically have become a closed system. So the context is, the congregation is not dependent or really even related to the context anymore. It's become like a little island in the community. And we can get so consumed in that work that we start to forget things like what John Wesley said, the world is my parish. Like the community is the church too. So it's just as important that I be in that coffee shop on Tuesday connecting with people out there, or going to my favorite Tex-Mex place to eat burritos and talk to the servers about what's going on in the community, whatever. That's all pastoral work too. So walking our context, taking it in, noticing it, immersing ourselves in it, that is something that I just think we don't think about a lot in the church anymore. And it's something that's really, really important. And then I think the other thing that I would say that is probably, if I had to pick out of our different FISAs, is just kind of translating and coding. We talk about embodied by the Spirit. So our language is really important, and how we communicate in a post-Christendom culture, people don't know what atonement is, or those words, or really even there's some buzzwords that if you want to shut down an evangelism kind of community quickly, sin, hell, those kind of things. Now those are realities that we do need to get to and to unpack, but how we communicate with people in their language, helping them understand Christianity and its fundamental truths, but in a language that they can actually access. Because if I'm just speaking a foreign language, it's, no one's going to pick that up or understand anything, and we're just kind of wasting our time.
No, that's so good. And it was reminding me, I had a church planting friend planted a church up in, I think, Detroit, Michigan. And I'd never heard this before, but he actually had in his job description that part of his job was he had to be out walking around in the neighborhood for, I forget how many hours a week, but that was literally his job, was he had to be out walking around. And they got it because they noticed Jesus just walked around.
Yes.
He did, and whenever people gathered together, he basically left, right? And so that they embedded that right into the job description. And I love the language stuff. And who have you found as authors that model, other than yourself, of course, that model creative use of language that's like say like a word like sin. Have you found authors or theologians that help us to come up with adjectives, synonyms that allow that actually speak to postmodern people? Any recommendations or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Leonard Sweet was somebody I think who's been doing this, and let me say, when I chose a doctor ministry program, I wanted to have somebody, and it was a great compliment that you said that our voices kind of synced a little bit, because I wanted to have somebody that had a whole body of work that would be kind of like my rabbi.
Yeah.
And part of the rabbinic tradition is you take on that person's voice and heart, and you try to read everything they've written, which is a challenge with Len, right? Because he's written like 60-something plus books, lots of bestsellers and stuff. But he's been doing that for so long. He's been trying to. He was writing about contextual intelligence like a decade, two ago, anyway. And trying to help us use that language and stuff. So, I really look to N.T. Wright a lot too. And Alan Hirsch, is one of I think he's somebody that's doing that really well and helping kind of reframe, the way that the church thinks about our society too. So those are a couple.
That's good. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for those recommendations. You also talk about, I thought this was kind of fun too. You have a kind versus wicked learning environments, and why is that distinction critical for missional leaders today, or even pastors that just want to become more missional than they are now?
Yeah, that is really key. It comes from the research of Hogarth, probably 15 years ago, actually, but in the educational realm. So a kind learning environment is where things move in a sequence, feedback is reliable. So if you think like chess or tennis, so there's rules of the game, there's a boundary, the knight can move 7 moves and this moves here. So there's, kind of a skills that can be mastered, and there's quick feedback. A wicked learning environment is almost the opposite of that. There's no boundaries. It's shifting all the time. Sometimes you don't even know what game you're playing. So it's like alien tennis. So what are the rules? How do you do this? So clergy really, and I think just Christians in general, through church systems, we've been prepared for kind learning environments. So for instance, one assumption is, you go to seminary, you get your degree, you get ordained and all that you're going to be sent to churches where there's actually people, right? Yeah. So that's a false assumption to these days, because we're being sent to churches where I've served 4 churches in a row where it's like 12 people, 30 people, 20 people. We're not being sent to thriving congregations of hundreds of people, right? So there's a whole other skill set. No matter how much you care for that existing congregation, it's not going to experience revitalization just by doing that. So you have to have this whole other skill set that includes engaging context in new ways, missional ecclesiology, all that stuff. So that we are in a wicked learning environment. Now, even pre-COVID, I love Gil Rendell. He talks about the church was planted in an aberrant time. He's another one who I look to kind of translate a lot. The church, the Western church, was an aberration. It came together with this formation of social, political, economic forces where Christianity was the center of American life. Blue laws and the corporate kind of philosophy was injected into the church, hierarchical, hub and spoke. Pastor is CEO, all of that stuff. And that's no longer the world that we're in. We're in a polycentric, dispersed, globalized, digital society. So if we're still operating in the assumptions of the kind learning environment of that aberrant time, and here we are in this wicked environment, then we just don't have the skills or the capacity to be in this adaptive situation. Another way to think about it is technical problems, technical solutions, or adaptive challenge. Like in the old model, if I applied the right technical solutions to those problems, we could have, whatever, vitality. And an adaptive challenge is just about learning to live in the new thing and adapt to the context where we find ourselves.
So I'm going to challenge you. Like, a lot of folks use that. That's that Ron Heifetz language from Harvard, adaptive and stuff. But I found I found a lot of people just like talking about adaptive stuff, and then you can even write books about it and look really smart. But then they don't really have a clue what you're actually supposed to do. So I think your book goes beyond that, because it actually gives tools. Because you've talked about boots on the ground. I like the phrase skin in the game. I mean, you can have all the leadership principles in the world, but if you don't have boots on the ground and actually just get out and talk to people, it doesn't matter how smart you are, right? And so, like, if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, like, okay, I'm in a wicked learning environment. I didn't get trained for this in seminary. I'm sitting on Zoom. We're talking on Zoom, so I just want to stay in my room and I want to project sermons out of my bedroom on Zoom and conquer down and wait for this thing to pass. What are some core practices that I could start doing today that would let me basically get into the game, even if I don't know what the game is? And not just talk about, I need to use adaptive leadership and stuff, but so how do I actually adapt? What's something I can do today that's going to make a difference 5-10 years from now in my ministry, or maybe even faster, hopefully?
Yeah, I think that I can't underplay the significance of listening, and these skills that we talk about in the book really have to be applied in the digital ecosystem, I think, today, to get in the game today. So just to give you some concrete examples, you can plant churches in the digital ecosystem with people that don't go to church. We've actually done it, and it's about, what's the need. So right now, when we first got thrown into COVID, we had a bunch of us included, parents, never been homeschooling parents before. Now we're homeschooling our parents. We have no idea what we're doing. So there's a whole community of us, right? So we know other parents, and they're like, what are y'all doing? Well, I don't know. I have no clue what I'm doing. I wanted to, smack my kid upside the head the other day. I'm just kidding. But so we get them together around, we called it supper table church. So, let's all make a meal, sit down, put a screen at your kitchen chair, and we're going to just communicate and talk. And so then we started building community around that. Then we started doing these theme nights, like let's all make Mexican food one night. Let's all make Italian food one night. And so we have these theme conversations around food. What are y'all eating? Well, we're eating this. And then part of it was talking about, here's what our kids are doing. This is what's working for us. We're trying this. And then another part of it was, so let's have a Jesus story tonight. Prayer, easing into that, because not everybody who's part of it's a Christian. Y'all mind next week if we have a word of prayer to open? So these little opt-in opportunities. So it's the same thing you would do in a physical space where you would go into a tattoo parlor because you may know the owner or whatever your third place is. You're listening, you're forming relationships, you're seeing what the need is. Then when the opportunity is right, you're sharing your faith. So while I do think every context is different, has to be dealt with different, there's no universal strategy. There are some practices, missional practices that I think are universal. So like prayerfully listening to God, to the community, to the context, identifying what's the need, what's hurt, what's the hurt here, where's the gaps, that people are experiencing, and how can we as the church step up into those? And I think it's sad that the church has been called like the least innovative organization in the world, because for the last 2,000 years, the most consistent tradition of the church is innovation. Like Christians created the first hospitals and universities and monasteries and shelters for those experiencing homelessness, right? Innovation is our thing. And it's really all about listening to what's the community, where's Christ at work, how do we step up in that gap? So those are just some things that anybody can like start to do today in any context, whether you're stuck in a digital space or whether you're doing reentry stuff, whatever that is.
I love what you just said, and I think I'm going to try to highlight even this part when I go back and try to pull out some pieces to try to get the word out, because I think you just solved the problem that I see in a lot of leadership books, and too many of us are waiting for a solution to drop into our laps that we can implement. And what you essentially just described is basically what every entrepreneur who's ever lived already knows. You have to actually start, and again, I apologize to everybody listening to using business language, but basically you have to start marketing before you even have the product.
Right.
And that's exactly what you did. And how do you know what the market? Well, you find out what a problem is. And the good news about the gospel, the way you've just talked about it, is the answer to every problem is Christian community. Yes. A Jesus-centered community. And you don't know how you're going to go from a bunch of parents that are going crazy because they're homeschooling to new church, but you just described a process where it basically, hey, let's just get together and have some food. And then you slowly bring pieces in. To me, that's true adaptive leadership on the front line. So I just want to say thank you that was probably the best answer to how do you deal with chaos that I think I've heard in a long time or maybe ever. So thank you, Michael, for that. Let me just ask you a couple more questions here just to be fair to the time. And we're going to have you back again too, because you're going to be a recurring guest on this podcast, if you will, because we got to pick your brain. And I'm getting all excited. So even if no one else listens all the way to the end, I'm going to be listening every time because I just love this kind of stuff. But also begs the question, and this is where people get nervous too. These things create some levels of discomfort, and because it's a stretch. And we all know that every time you do something new, or anytime you do something other than what you've already done, it requires courage. And whenever you need courage, you don't feel good on the inside. We always admire courage after the fact, but if you have to be courageous, something uncomfortable is happening, and all these new expressions are hard because there's no blueprint for them. Mm-hmm. So from a spiritual formation perspective, what practices do you recommend people that you coach and that you work with that they implement in their lives so that they can actually live into these new opportunities without either burning themselves out or just becoming disheartened? So what are spiritual practices that really undergird yourself as a pastor, but also your lay folks that are with you in this, that prepare you to be a missional, literally on the front lines?
I think the most important thing, I love to go back to Jesus' parable, the vine and the branches, and it's to stay connected to Jesus. And for me, that's about scheduling. It's about making him my top priority in the mornings. It's about spending time in the scriptures for me personally, not because I'm preparing something I'm going to tell somebody else, but my own personal engagement with that. My prayer life has really evolved mostly to a listening posture, where I still do some, my congregations bring me requests, and so I have my particular groups of people I'm praying for, but it's mostly just a time of turning off my mind long enough to hear from God. And that takes, for me, because I have a little bit of hyperactivity disorder, really stilling my mind and my soul, doing some kind of scriptural visualization stuff that I do, and just going, listening for the Lord. I think where we miss the mark sometimes in Western Christianity, it's just an incredible spiritual practice, is our physicality. Our body has to be included in when we think about our spiritual health. So from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it talks about human beings made in the image of God as integrated, mind, body, soul. Yes, those are distinct kind of dimensions of our humanity, but they're all weaved together as one. And physically, we're going to experience resurrection, not as some disembodied spirit, right, but as a physical being. So our physicality, our mental life, our emotional life, all that's linked together. So if we get in this cycle, and I know because I fell into it myself in ministry, where I'm eating unhealthy, I'm not taking care of my body, I'm not, physically okay, that's going to have effects on every other part, my mind, my spirituality, my emotional life. So I think for me, people might think this is crazy, but working out every day, sweating and stinking every day in some way, for whatever's fun for you. It doesn't have to be, well, I hate running. Well, cycling or strength training or yoga or whatever, just something where physically, and I consider that to be an act of worship. So those are my priorities. Like, if we have to care for ourselves, our relationship with God, we can't give what we don't have, we say in the recovery community. So we have to be operating from that light yoke of Jesus, where it's flowing from that relationship that we have with him. Then I think the other thing for ministry, the most important thing, is using teams. And the heroic solo leadership to team-based leadership, one of my mentors, George Acevedo, talks about this all the time. But really understanding the priesthood of all believers is that every single person has a calling on their life. They have gifts from God. They have a relationship with the Holy Spirit. So helping people attune themselves to that, to the sensitivity to the Spirit, their own gifts and calling, and moving from, I know a lot of clergy we're wired for regulation. Like, I have to regulate this, I have to control it, rather than resourcing. And I don't see my role as a clergy person as a regulator. I'm a resourcer. Good. So I come alongside my people, and that's 12-year-old Angel who wants to start a fresh expression in the library with her friends reading books, to 80-year-old Larry who has a passion for taking his dog Rocky to the dog park, and he has a group of friends there that he wants to share his faith with, and so that becomes a church, called Paws of Praise. And everybody in between. So everybody deep down inside, I think we want to make positive contributions to the world. We want to share our faith with our friends. We want to be involved in forming spiritual community with other people. And for a long time, the church has been like this glass ceiling situation where, okay, the mature leaders serve on committees, or they read liturgy, or that, rather than thinking of, how does my faith in Jesus spill out into every area of my life? Not just be contained in this thing we do in the building, but every possible space and place where I am, where Jesus is at work, people can form community.
Yeah, thank you for giving us a real integrated vision of that actually extends beyond the person, to reminding us that at some level, spiritual practices, especially as pastors, is learning how to actually delegate and build teams that can be really effective. So good in the physical piece. What would be some resources that you would recommend if I've listened to this and it's like, other than your book, again, we want to, again, Michael Beck, Leonard Sweet, Contextual Intelligence, Unlocking the Ancient Secret to Mission on the Front Lines. Other than that, this wonderful resource that we'll put links to in the show notes, what are some other resources that you would recommend people dig into? Other than, of course, it's the Bible, but beyond the scriptures, what would you recommend that people take a look at?
I think that one of the most important things happening in the world is the Fresh Expressions movement. And it goes by many names, and there's all different versions of it. So I wouldn't pigeonhole and say, just this version of it. But it's these new Christian communities that are forming out in every space and place of life. And we know the church has become inaccessible to most people. And the only way it will become accessible is to form Christian community out in every space and place of life, right? So I think a good place to start is the Mission Shaped Church Report, which was produced in 2008, Church of England. For those of us on the United States side of things, England is from our future. So they're about 10, 20 years ahead of us in the decline and secularization of society. So that report really kind of set a trajectory to notice the church really has to start thinking about a mixed economy is the language they use, or we like to use the language of blended ecology of church. So inherited forms of church, traditional forms, and these new missional forms all living together in a symbiotic relationship. So anything that you can get your hands on. One of my personal favorites is Reverend Dr. Michael Moyna. who has written a lot. He's got a book called Church in Life. He's actually kind of written the textbooks for the Fresh Expressions movement, A Church for Every Context. He's got a lot of great stuff out there. Graham Cray was a bishop who was very involved with the starting of the movement. He's written an incredible group of resources. I think obviously anything written by Alan Hirsch and his many partners, his many conversation partners around 5Q, missional church movement. I think The Shaping of Things to Come, if you've not read that, it's like a foundational kind of text. For those that have a more of a pioneer, a little bit of a rebel side, you may want to try Gerald Arbuckle's Refounding the Church, where he talks about the concepts of principled dissent. And he identifies Jesus as a principled dissenter. So in systems of death and decline, we have to dissent in principled ways to bring change and transformation. So that's also some great stuff. And obviously I try to read anything written by N.T. Wright.
That's good. So where can people find out more about you? Where's the best place to find your new book? Where can folks connect with you beyond this podcast, Michael?
Well, obviously Amazon and all those normal things. I have my own website, michaeladambeck.com, and I try to just post regularly blogs and new books that are coming out and those kind of things on there. And you could also follow Leonard Sweet and his Preach the Story community, which is, he keeps that pretty updated all the time. And the Fresh Expressions US movement has a website with incredible resources. We do what we call the Resilient Church Academies. We're doing rounds of those like every month, different practical tools and skills that you would need for this new, particularly in the pandemic season, to be the church in this time.
Good. And again, I want to thank you. Thank you for, I think, being an inspiration. It's since the second you walked into my class, I always feel like at some level, the students become the teacher. So I always love having a conversation with you. I'm grateful for the work that you do for the Lord, how you, all the energy that you have for that. I'm grateful for your family and it's the big witness that you have. And for now, you as an author and being on the national stage. So thank you, Michael, for being a faithful servant of Jesus Christ and modeling the way forward for us as we kind of grope about in this really strange liminal time that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for being one of my mentors.
Like I said, the students become the teacher now, but it's a joy. It's a joy to see what, it's one of the ultimate blessings is to get to work when you work at the seminaries, you get to work with fantastically fine people and you're right up there. So thank you. And, folks, until next time, we'll get Michael back on here, but until we have our next podcast, live by faith, be known by love, and be voices of hope in a world that desperately needs it. Amen. Hi, this is Brian Russell, and thank you so much for listening to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. It's a real privilege to serve you through this medium. If you would take just a minute and click subscribe, whether you're seeing this on YouTube or listening to it through Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you receive your podcasts, I would be grateful. And if you really like the content, please leave a review so other people can locate this podcast. If you have ideas for guests or you just have questions, you can reach out to me, deepdivespirituality@gmail.com.